Well, good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Diverse Patient Participation, Overcoming Barriers in Site-Based and Decentralized Studies. My name is Ryan Muse and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using the same chat panel. I'd also like to welcome our attendees viewing this presentation from our LinkedIn Live event, and I encourage you to submit questions as well via the comments tab. At this time, note that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming to those who registered on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Elligo Health Research, who developed the content for this presentation. Elligo Health Research accelerates clinical trials through EHR data, their proprietary Elligo technology, and direct access to known, diverse patients from more than 115 hospitals and major health systems, 200 healthcare-based sites, and 100 research-based sites. The patient select model engages their network of networks to optimize the intersection of healthcare and research and bring more patients clinical research as a care option. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Rita Yankyera is a highly skilled clinical research professional and sub-investigator with a rich background in healthcare. Originally from Ghana, West Africa, Rita obtained her bachelor's degree in nursing from the University of Cape Coast, Ghana, before pursuing her master's in science, family nurse practitioner degree at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. Leslie Carney, MBA, has over 20 years of consumer marketing, relationship management, and sales experience, having started in the nonprofit sector as a fundraiser before joining clinical research in 2017. Leslie joined Elligo in 2024 as Senior Director, Patient Solutions, and is leading the company's initiative to maximize internal resources. And Chris Benevides is an accomplished director or leader in the clinical trial space, specializing in patient travel, recruitment, and retention efforts. With over 13 years of experience in driving market growth and customer value through innovative sales and marketing strategies, Chris has spent the last 5 years focused on clinical trials. But without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and hand the mic over to our first speaker for today. Rita Yankyera, you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We can go on to the next slide. Basically, today we will be looking at the barriers to enrolling diverse patients when it comes to clinical trials and how to overcome these barriers, especially looking at traditional studies as well as DCT trials. Ryan, we do have a poll question here and would like to get some insights from our participants.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. So appearing on everyone's screen right now is a polling question, and you can participate if you're attending via GoToWebinar by selecting on any of the answers you see in front of you and then clicking Submit. The question that we're asking is, what is the first thing that comes in your mind when you hear of diversity in clinical trials? Your answer options are race or ethnic differences, age differences, gender differences, socioeconomic statuses, or disability statuses. We'll give everyone some time to consider their answer as it best applies to yourself and your experience, because what we're curious to hear from you right now is, what is the first thing that comes in your mind when you hear of diversity in clinical trials? Give you a few more seconds to consider an answer and participate, and then we'll continue to hear from our speakers today. All right, it looks like most of you have your answer in. Thank you everyone for participating. Interesting result that we have here. Looks like 100% of you selecting for race and ethnic differences. So thank you very much for your participation. I'll hand it back to Rita.
All right, thank you all. So this is really interesting to know that most people do see diversity as more of a race and ethnic thing. But when we look here on my next slide with the FDA guidance, we do see that in the FDA's recent guidance, they are letting us know that when it comes to diversity, we are looking both at race and ethnicity, but also at gender and age differences when it comes to enrolling patients. So I have that highlighted here. And that's good to know that at least we all know that race and ethnicity plays a role when it comes to clinical trial diversity. So we know from historical data that people from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups have often been left out when it comes to clinical trial participation. And this has been due to several reasons, but most significantly, it has been due to a lack of trust. I know we all know about the famous Tuskegee study, and also several other studies that have eroded trust when it comes to especially patients from the African American community and other minority groups in the medical community. And now more than ever, there is a push from agencies like the FDA and the EMA for diverse participants to be enrolled in a study. And we can see that this is indeed critical for generating the data that reflect real-world populations and for ensuring that all groups benefit from medical advancements. And as the FDA notes in the recent guidance they released this year, the requirement for diversity action plans for studies, particularly when it comes to phase 3 studies, is very important. And mainly because it's aiming to increase the inclusion of diverse populations as it relates to the age, gender, race, and ethnicity that I mentioned in the beginning. In my next slide, we will look at underrepresentation when it comes to clinical trials in the US population. So this slide highlights a crucial disparity in clinical research. While the US population is becoming increasingly diverse, we realize that clinical trial participants do not necessarily reflect this diversity. The data reveals significant underrepresentation of racial and ethnic minority groups in clinical research compared to their proportion in the general population. If you look here in my slide on the left side, you will see that the chart shows the racial and ethnic composition of the US population. Minority groups, including Blacks and African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, looking at Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders and Native Americans, do represent a substantial portion of the US population. However, the data on the right side demonstrates that the participation in clinical trials skews disproportionately toward non-Hispanic white individuals. And most times we ask ourselves why. Minority groups are consistently underrepresented, with African Americans and Hispanics, for example, often participating at a much lower rate than their population share. Underrepresentation in clinical trials always means that we lack critical data on how treatments affect diverse populations. And this can lead to gaps in understanding the differences in drug efficacy, safety, and the dosage needs across groups. And there's always concerns for health equity, as without equitable participation, the benefits of research may not reach all the populations that we are looking at, and this perpetuates the existing health disparities. In my next slide, we will also look at diverse participation and why it is essential. We can move on to the next slide as well. So when we talk about the importance of diverse participation, it is more than just a game number. You know, if we look at it critically, we realize that it's a foundational aspect of conducting research that benefits everyone. So here we see that some of the few reasons why diversity is important is, number one, the fact that we can generalize the results. First, when diversity ensures that the results of a clinical trial can be applied to real-world populations. And this is because if trials predominantly include one demographic group, the data may not accurately predict how treatment will work for other people. And to ensure the effectiveness and safety of medical products for all, it is always crucial to have participants that reflect the population's diversity. We also see that it is necessary to improve health equity. Diverse representation in clinical trials is a matter of fairness. When we look at it, we don't want one group of people always participating at the expense of the other and vice versa. So when we talk about fairness, we want to make sure that there's representation from all the groups, and also especially that the group that is mostly affected by the disease and the study is represented in the trial. And this is key because when drugs come out on the market and there's not a representation when the trial was done, we then tend to see all the other side effects that pop up in the general populations once the drug is on the market. We also realized that it is important for diversity to be done because it helps to develop long-term trust among people. We know that there is skepticism among some communities about participating in clinical research. And this is also mostly due to all that we know about the historical abuses that have happened in research. And so when we demonstrate a commitment to inclusion and transparency, it helps to rebuild the trust that we need to be able to further advance science. Also, it is important because ethically, that is what we have to do. From the ethical standpoint, all individuals deserve the opportunity to participate from clinical research. And this includes access to potentially life-saving treatments and the knowledge generated by these studies. A diverse participant pool always ensures that we uphold the ethical principles of justice and fairness that we all look to do in clinical research. And this ensures that those who are most impacted by the disease and the study have the same access to the healthcare innovations and treatment that we deem important. We also realize that people do not necessarily respond to treatment in the same way due to several reasons, such as genetics, environmental conditions, lifestyle differences across populations. And because of that, one drug would have a different effect in a specific group of people compared to the other. Same way, the efficacy and the safety of the drug may not necessarily be the same across all populations. And so without studying these variations, we usually risk missing critical insights that could guide and better treatments for everybody. And when a study also lacks diversity, we realize that the post-market effects can be harmful among certain groups of people, especially people of racial and ethnic minorities. And finally, regulatory agencies like the FDA and EMA are increasingly emphasizing the importance of diversity in trials. They make it known that sponsors who fail to demonstrate inclusive recruitment may face delays or even denials during the approval process. So we want to make sure that we build diversity into the trial right from the beginning to ensure that we meet those expectations from the regulatory agencies. We will be talking about the key barriers in diverse patient recruitment on the next slide. Okay, thank you. So there are several barriers when it comes to enrolling populations, and we can group this under 4 broad categories. The first one we look at is the individual factors. And mainly when we talk about this, we are focusing on the fact that most people are not aware of clinical research. I always use myself as an example. When I first started working in clinical research, I had no idea what clinical research was all about. It took me several readings and investigations to realize that there is this branch of medicine that most people are not even aware. So even us as healthcare professionals, if we do not know much about clinical research, how much more the lay person? So we want to make sure that on the individual level that people are aware of clinical research, because it's not the norm for people to talk about research as other areas of healthcare. There's also a limited understanding of the medical and research terminology, such that it makes it difficult for people to want to enroll in a trial because it gets confusing. They may not know really what they're looking at. Most people feel like they're going to be used as guinea pigs, as we know from history. And we need to clear all those misconceptions when it comes to the individual factors when participating in clinical trials. Also, people have issues like financial constraints, transportation issues, time commitment, and other things that may prevent them from participating in research. Then when we talk about the interpersonal factors, mostly it deals with the relationship between an individual and their provider, and also all the social influences that we all are being exposed to. We can also look at it from the standpoint of family members and community leaders and how they can play a role in ensuring that people are aware of clinical research and are readily available to want to participate. When we talk about the provider-patient relationship, we realize that most times providers do not necessarily introduce their patients to clinical research because they may also not have any idea about clinical research. And even if they do, they may not have the research available at their facility. And because of that, they are not able to actively enroll people. If they have to refer patients to somebody else, they're thinking about all these logistics, and the patient may not necessarily trust the other provider to provide them the care that they need as compared to their primary care provider. And then when we talk about the institutional factors, there are so many things that we can consider in terms of the structures and how the practices within the healthcare organization works. And then we have the policy-related factors that may not always have the best interest of people in clinical research at heart. So there's always not that accountability that people can feel like if something happened to them in clinical research, they are going to be catered for, they are going to be cared for. And all these are barriers that we are looking to break down so that we can ensure that every study is able to meet their diversity goals. And so here at Elligo Research, on my next slide, there are so many things that we are doing to ensure that we can break those barriers and ensure that we are able to reach our diversity goals for the trials that we participate in. These are general points, but my colleagues will be breaking it down for us when it comes to how Elligo is improving and making sure that we are meeting our diversity goals. So we have sites that are embedded within clinical practices across the United States in most of the states here. We have providers that are embedding research within their sites. We have engaged with stakeholders to ensure that we can make public the awareness of clinical research among the general population, especially within the minority communities. We are also providing adequate compensation when we start our trials to ensure that patients feel like their time is indeed valued when they are participating in research. Our research staff are from diverse backgrounds, and we realize that this really helps to bridge the gap for patients when it comes to enrolling in clinical trials. And also we do have experience in undertaking decentralized trials and hybrid trials that my colleague Leslie will be taking on from here to give us more information about. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rita. And on the next slide, we do have a bit of an illustration of how Elligo functions and supports different trial designs. So as Rita was just saying, we were founded on the premise that research should be offered as a care option, and that treating physicians really do want to have more options available for their patients. And as we all know, clinical research is a heavy lift to take on top of your day-to-day running a practice. So you may know us best for our site network and traditional model with physical sites across the US, which is a strength of ours in that we have known trusted physicians with established relationships in their community. And so they already have that first degree of trust and knowledge to help overcome the barriers that Rita has spoken with within their communities. And then we have also now had a breadth of experience in different optimized trial designs. So whether that's hybrid, doing some virtual direct patient recruitment, as well as on-site activities and fully virtual studies. So all of the different study designs, we are very proud that we have different strategies that we can offer. It's unique that within our company we have these varying approaches available to us, and we really do get excited to partner with clients on what exactly they need from their study, what are the different patient profiles, what are the diversity goals, in which type of diversity, to Rita's point with the poll earlier, gender and age as well. And then really thinking through what are the assessments that are going to be required, and whether or not there can be some at-home or remote opportunity that would be able to expand either the geography or the reach of patients that would be interested in this study. So we have within Elligo patient solutions with recruitment and travel, and we'll turn it over to Chris now to talk about how our travel offering can support breaking down some of these barriers as well.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, so one of the unique things I think that Rita brought up was the individual sort of barriers that subjects face, especially when it comes to thinking about ways to connect with diverse populations. And again, to Rita's point, and really how the industry looks at it, of course, race and ethnicity are of one of the many factors, but of course, age, gender, socioeconomic are all impacting decision-making abilities for subjects, on a day-to-day level within their own personal lives. And so what you have in front of you in this screen here, there are two different studies that were conducted. One was a study, pre-COVID back in 2017, but then the one on the right side is one from Elligo specifically in 2021 post-COVID. So the one on the left side here states that 91% of surveyed patients felt that the distance to travel to trial sites was an important factor in their participation for their trial. And then Elligo did conduct, again, as I mentioned, in 2021, about a handful of our current clinical trials had stated, and the patients had stated that 55% mentioned that the physical location of the site would have been a barrier to entry if not for the travel service in and of itself. So, when you really kind of boil that down, what that means is that as hard as it is to find the right types of subjects across the board, what we're looking at is, roughly 1 in half are essentially stating, look, I would love to join this clinical trial, but I physically cannot get there for some particular reason. And if to call back to Rita's slide on the barriers to enrollment, one of those was individual factors, specifically to the time and resource component and constraints that patients face, every single day. And so the purpose of, having a travel component in anyone's particular protocol and the study design and resources for that, for those subjects is really to remove that barrier that, again, everyone faces, right? It's money, it's time constraints, it's resources. And so, that is really the purpose of why a travel platform or a travel program should be included, really for every type of clinical trial that is being considered for all different types of patients. And then particularly, when you look at, diverse populations, again, whether it's socioeconomic, if it's urban versus rural, if there's any, race or ethnic components that are a part of that trial, specifically to Rita's point on gaining trust within the sentiment of each subject, it's really following through on what you're saying you're going to deliver. And so, if you're trying to make access to clinical trials a reality, having, for example, a travel component that we know is going to remove those specific barriers for subjects will definitely be heard, welcomed, and enjoyed by those subjects, who do face those constraints. And so, what are those types of constraints? For example, rural communities, there could be access, physically getting to the site. For example, they live very far away from these sort of inner city sites. And so how are they going to get there? They're 4 or 5 hours away, some of them. And, who's going to support, setting up a black car service? Who's going to support, even maybe calling an Uber or something? And how are they going to get to those locations, bringing those patients to and from urban communities, right? Are there resource constraints? I know for myself, my wife and I, we're always trying to go back and forth on, what car are we using? We have a 7-month-old, how are we getting to his visits at the doctor's appointments? And so it's a constant battle, a constant communication internally with my own family. And so those are the same kinds of conversations that subjects are having. And, maybe there is only one car, and that, even though a subject wanted to participate in a trial, they physically can't get there. So, who is supporting them on the travel component? And then if they are taking their own car, mileage components, meals, there's a lot that goes into taking a whole day off, maybe multiple days off for participating in those clinical trials. And so, all of those items, should be and I'm happy to see that they are being considered for the benefit of these subjects who are, again, being impacted by us asking them to come and join this clinical trial. While we think it's going to help their lives, we of course also need to make it worth their while at the same time. So all of these components are incredibly important. And then finally, what I would say is, of course, with whatever type of company that you work with, for example, if it were Elligo or others, make sure that site communication is really strong between the patient and the site coordinator coming through the vendor itself. And so what I mean by that is that sometimes, we work with sites and, we have these onboardings and we have to remind them, hey, look, remind these subjects that they have these resources available to them, right? The study was designed in a certain way. Let's make sure that we're educating these subjects as best as we can to ensure that, again, we're instilling that trust, that we're allowing them the opportunity to take advantage of the resources that the study has to offer. So again, all of these things are incredibly important. I'm very happy to see that the market is maturing in such a way that is benefiting the subjects. But of course, there's a lot more work that we have to do, and we'll continue to have these discussions and educate subjects as to what is available for every clinical trial. Leslie, I'll pass it over to you on the recruitment side.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I agree that customization based on what patient populations we're seeking is really important. So it's a collaboration, right, between the client and the sites that are involved and all of the vendors to try and make this patient experience and journey very smooth and seamless. So it's great to see so many people working together on these common challenges. We here at the end of our presentation just wanted to share a few examples of ways that we have deployed strategies to reach specific diversity goals within projects that we have been involved with at Elligo. So in one study, we did have a short enrollment window to begin with. And in the last probably half of the study, we were informed by the sponsor that we needed to course correct and be focusing on older males. This was late in the game and we required a really quick pivot in order for us to continue enrolling and maximizing. This project, we were utilizing our site network. So we had access to our databases of patients as well as existing relationships in the community. So we were able to become, to recreate content and imagery to make sure that we were appealing to senior males, as well as wanting to be able to get out in front of all the community partners and healthcare physician relationships that were already established to make them aware of the change in this so that we are being mindful of their time that they were committing to the project as well. And we fortunately were able to overcome that kind of late in the game shift and be able to reach the goals that we needed to for that project. Another example of a study that we worked on was focused the way that everyone on this call had answered our question on diversity, which was primarily around race and ethnicity. And in this project, we actually were able to work with community-based local pharmacies. There is a lot of trust within communities and going into their pharmacy. If you have chronic conditions, you get to know your pharmacy and your pharmacist, and it's a nice relationship touch point. And so with these local community pharmacies, we were able to include study information and advertisements on the pharmacy bags themselves to help raise awareness and really find a way to share the information in a place that we already knew the patients would be interacting. And then the last study example that we have here, it's a fully virtual study. So we are relying on digital marketing primarily for the project. And this actually gives us quite a bit of flexibility. I would say another benefit to a fully virtual study is that we are not geographically constrained. So in the projects that Chris was speaking of, where we have physical sites and you're trying to get patients to that site, in a fully virtual model, we actually have more geography. And so a greater opportunity to find the pockets of the population, whether that's in different states, in different parts of the city, in different states, whatever subpopulation we're seeking, and be able to tailor the content, the geographic targeting, the interest groups that we're able to know that these individuals might be participating in already, and have a lot of flexibility to be able to change quickly with any type of digital advertising so that we can reach enriched patient population goals that are set for the project. And I believe that is the end of our content, but I do know we have some Q&A. So Ryan, I think you might be facilitating that for us.
Yes, well, thank you very much for this very insightful presentation. As we move into the Q&A session, I'd like to direct the audience's attention towards the handouts module within the GoToWebinar control panel, where they'll find some additional documentation related to today's presentation to download for some further reading. I'd also like to invite the audience to keep sending their questions or comments right now for the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you're attending via GoToWebinar, please use the questions window. For those watching on LinkedIn Live events, feel free to post your questions in the comments section. I've already received some questions though from the audience, so we'll get ourselves started with those. The very first question I have here, and Rita, perhaps this is directed towards yourself. Someone just wants to know, what has your experience been in partnering with clinicians to reach patients of racial and ethnic minority?
Thank you, Ryan. That's a good one. So yeah, here at Elligo, I have been involved with trying to meet up with physicians of minority groups, mainly African American physicians, to help us reach their patients. But one thing I realized in doing that is that it's not that easy to break into this area of medicine, especially because of that lack of trust we mentioned in the beginning. It's still there. People still have it at the back of their mind that when we talk about clinical research, we are looking for people to kind of use as guinea pigs, for a lack of better word. So being able to engage with our physicians in those areas needs a little bit of strategy to be able to get them to understand that this is key to be able to come out with devices, drugs, and vaccines that are safe for everyone, you know. So I've been able to partner with a couple of doctors, but we haven't been able to get there yet where you would have that feeling that their patients are willing, or they are able to educate their patients, for their patients to understand that this is a key thing that people need to be invested in to ensure that when we have drugs and devices come on the market, they benefit everybody and not a few people. Because like I said in my previous presentation, when medicines come on the market, the post market data that we gather do not necessarily align with the data that we realized in undertaking the clinical trial, just because we did not have that representation from all the different race, ethnicity, age, and gender groups, such that when the medicine comes on the market, we could see the same effect. And so the post-market data does not necessarily correlate with the data that was received from the clinical trial at that time. And so it's very key for us to be able to get our physicians from all these racial and minority ethnic groups to be involved in clinical research. And we are still working on it. We are not there yet, but we are hoping that we can get to a point where clinical research is something that every physician, every provider is able to talk about with their patients, not necessarily because they have a trial at their site, but to be able to educate their patients so that they can actively seek trials that suit either their condition or anything else that they're looking to do just to advance medicine.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that answer. Next question here, Leslie, someone says that they're a site director, and the question they have is, where should I start when wanting to focus their team on diverse patient enrollment?
That's a great question too. So maybe just an example from what I did myself this year, new to joining Elligo, and taking an inventory of your existing team and learning where people may not be talking about this on a daily basis, but where they are from. Rita being from Ghana was new until we started working together more closely. Where you have staff that might already be in a group that you know you're going to want to be reaching in the future, and then understanding who has different languages that they can speak. Are you going to be able at your site, aside from getting translated materials, you can't do anything with the content if you don't have an individual that can speak with the patients in that way, assuming the protocol allows for different languages as well. but understanding your people and their experiences and through life outside of work even too, to be able to weigh in. I mean, you could do some really good focus group work even within your own team at your site. And then there might be some really good feedback that maybe they didn't feel comfortable sharing before, or didn't feel like it could be elicited in a way that would be constructive. So I think really there's a lot of things you're probably already doing at the site that are intended to enroll diverse patients. I mean, many of us have been doing this already without more of the directive from the FDA. So understanding where you've been and what you already have that you're working towards. And then I think as we work towards like diversity action plans that will be required, what can our site template, similar to how we all have site recruitment plans already, but layering in that if there are diversity goals, which populations and which of the strategies you might be typically deploying would apply to those, and then what kind of tailoring would be needed to make that most effective.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I've got a question here about travel. So Chris, maybe you'd like to comment on this one. Someone's just asking if can travel offerings be tailored based on rural or urban site locations within one project?
Yeah, so not only can it be, it really should be. So, especially at the onset of the protocol development, specifically then the budget development outside of that, once you're lining up all the resources that you'd like to include as part of the trial, the sort of central points of where the sites are located should be a factor. So for example, you can really kind of think of this into two different ways. What kind of resources are available to get subjects to and from those sites, and then kind of the dollar value for things like stipends. So if I were to sort of take the first one, with say urban versus rural, how is it that typical people travel in urban communities? What is sort of the best method of booking a particular trip, right? So you could of course do a black car service, but maybe Uber or a Lyft healthcare provider is a more sort of cost effective and friendly option, still get the same quality, so to speak. From the aspect of getting subjects to and from. It's also a little bit more convenient because they're much more available, and the timing of it, right? So say a visit ends early, the Uber or Lyft could be there much faster than say a black car service, right? Whereas a rural community, right, of course, like as I mentioned earlier, some of these subjects are 4 or 5 hours away. Are we talking flights? Are we talking a black car service to get them to and from? Does a hotel need to be provided overnight stay? So all of that really needs to be factored into its consideration. Another one, for example, ex-US or OUS countries, European culture comes to mind quite often. Especially when I lived in France for quite a while. Using train was a very obvious option to get from point A to point B for a lot of patients in Europe. And so, do we consider train as being part of that tailorization? And I think that's, certainly has to be a part of the discussion. The other part are things like stipends, for example. Every program should be customizing its stipend schedule. So for example, New York City, pretty expensive to live in. Should the stipend be a little bit more, for subjects who live there than, subjects maybe in not so high of a price range type of community, as an example, right? Those are the types of customizations to kind of balance things out and keep things into consideration, again, socioeconomically, but also age, race and ethnicity, and then of course, again, just resource availability is kind of really where it boils down to. So yeah, I would say again, can it be offered? Yes. Should it be offered? Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, I've got another question here, and maybe everyone might have a little bit of their own thoughts for this. Someone says, of these two, which is the biggest barrier to cost-effective patient recruitment? They say, one, initial discovery of the research opportunity by researchers and sponsors on one hand, and by patients and participants on the other, or screening and onboarding.
I could maybe start here, but happy to have others jump in. I think in both of the scenarios, whether you're talking about after you've reached the patient or trying to shepherd them through the screening window, if there's any run-in periods, and keep them engaged until the enrollment, really we're talking about time commitment, time as a resource. And so if you're looking at the planning process, I think, which was the first part of the question, depending on how many goals that you have within your protocol design, how many different subpopulations you're trying to reach, taking the time to thoughtfully consider what strategies would be needed. Time costs money, and that is a limiting factor if you're trying to keep it cost effective. So the more time we take, the more thoughtful and more effective we might be able to be. But that might not be the most cost efficient way to do the work. And then even during, again, I think what, as Rita has talked about, like lack of knowledge and healthcare literacy issues, like it takes longer to have conversations with certain populations. It might take them more conversations before they're ready to commit. They might not want to immediately have a consent visit. They might need to go back and talk to their family members, multi-generational families and decision makers in their lives. So it's probably across the spectrum. I don't know if it's an either or to answer the question, but those are my initial thoughts.
That's great, thank you. I don't know, Rita, if perhaps you had some of your own thoughts to share from your own experience with this?
Yeah, I think Leslie covered most of it.
Yeah. Sorry, Rita.
No, that's okay. But yeah, I mean, I feel like Leslie said, both of them are barriers. It's hard to say one or the other when it comes to the biggest barrier in enrolling to cost-effective patient recruitment. I think one way that we can enroll patients without necessarily spending so much is being able to do the education upfront, even before a trial starts. Being in the community and advocating for patients to be able to be available to participate. For instance, if patients have to work Monday through Friday or whatever their schedules are we actively like making sure that there's always room for people not to lose income, or have that in the back of their mind that if I want to participate in a research study, I'm going to be covered one way or the other. So being able to do that right from the onset, even before we start enrolling, it's going to be key to break that barrier of especially enrolling those diverse patients into our trials.
Yeah, very excellent. Very well said, both of you. Thank you so much for your thoughts on this. I think we've reached the end of the Q&A portion for our webinar today. If we couldn't attend to your questions, know that the team at Elligo will follow up with you. If you have further questions, you can direct them to the email address up on the screen. I also want to invite people who are interested in hearing more from Elligo Health Research that you can register for their next webinar, EHR Optimization and Decentralized Strategies for Clinical Performance Studies of Liquid Biopsy Technology in Cancer Screening, which is scheduled for Wednesday, December 18th, 2024, and you can use the link that I've sent in the chat box. I want to thank everyone for participating in the webinar today and let you know that you'll be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it helps us to improve our webinars. Additionally, I've also shared a link to view the recording of today's event in the chat box, which you can also share with your colleagues so they may register for the recording here as well. For those watching via LinkedIn Live events, we encourage you to visit xtalks.com to register for this event and gain access to features such as viewing the recording and more. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speakers for their wonderful time here today. We hope that you found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.